got an email from somebody. By the way, if you want to send me an email, you can do it by going to owenmorgan.com and hitting the Contact Me button in the menu. This is from Sheena. I put my name on a Jehovah's Witness website to have somebody come to my house so I can ask some questions and see what the answers are. And I wanted to know if there was a list of questions I should ask. It's an interesting question. Now, there's something called the CES Letter in Mormonism. Me being an ex-Jehovah's Witness, the CES Letter doesn't really apply to me entirely, but it's an interesting letter anyways. It asks tough questions the Mormon Church can't answer. Things like, Joseph Smith claimed to have received divine revelation from God and was supposedly translating gold plates that were written in, I think, the 500s Common Era. So like 1,500 years ago or something like that. Joseph Smith, well, at his time, I guess it was like 1,200 years ago. This is in the 17th century. He claimed to have translated gold plates written in the 500s. But the plates that he was translating, quote unquote, had errors in Bible quotes that only existed in his edition of the King James Bible that were corrected later, in later editions. Why didn't God give him the correct, inspired word? Why did God give him the error in the gold plates? Those types of questions are the things you find in the CES Letter to the Mormon Church. So I've been thinking about creating a CES Letter for Jehovah's Witnesses effectively. And I've come up with at least a few questions that you can ask that they simply cannot answer. So let me lay some questions down for you and explain the context behind them. Why do Jehovah's Witnesses ban celebrating Christmas, Easter, birthdays, toasting at weddings, pinjatas, and wind chimes? Because of their pagan roots, but wedding rings are perfectly acceptable despite their admittedly pagan roots. The answer Jehovah's Witnesses will give is, wedding rings are from pagan origins, I guess, wearing a wedding ring, but it's far enough removed from pagan origins that it's not really important. They don't care. They're just, it's a little thing, and it's a cultural thing, so whatever. I find it interesting that they would give that as an answer. They actually officially on the record gave that as an answer to that question. It's interesting to me because all of the other stuff they listed, Christmas, birthdays, toasting, wind chimes, those aren't sufficiently removed from paganism. And what is paganism actually? When Jehovah's Witnesses use the term paganism, what they mean when they say it is anybody who is not of Jewish origin, basically. So in Bible times, a pagan was somebody who wasn't Jewish. Like, when Jesus was walking around the earth, of course, Jesus was Jewish. Anybody who was not of that religion was pagan. Anybody who worshipped Thor, Zeus, Apollo, Poseidon, Neptune, any of them, Greek or Roman gods, whatever, they were pagans. Non-Jewish people. So I suppose you could say that wind chimes came from non-Jewish origins, but wouldn't that just be like a cultural thing? Isn't that just something people did, have wind chimes? Why does it have to be linked to a religion? Piñatas, toasting, birthdays, wedding rings, Christmas wreaths. None of this stuff is really linked to religion, certainly not anymore. There's no good answer to this question for Jehovah's Witnesses. It's a pure hypocrisy that we're looking at here. Quick interjection, this won't take long. I just want to say, if you want to support my channel, the best way you can do it is by watching this video to the end, or at least watching a little bit longer than you would have otherwise. YouTube's recommendation algorithm works off of watch time. You can also subscribe to the channel, like the video, and check out my Patreon. Link is in the description for that. All right, back to the video. Here's another question for you. Why is it that the governing body identified the United Nations as the scarlet-colored beast with 7 heads and 10 horns from the book of Revelation, but you felt it was acceptable to register as a non-government organization, NGO, a member of the United Nations from February 1992 to October 2001? That hypocrisy was so blatant and ridiculous that The Guardian reported on it. at the time in 2001, and Jehovah's Witnesses pulled out instantly. They're like, we're done. And they wrote letters to all the congregations and said, if anybody asks about this, just clamp it. Don't say a word. They don't even respond to this. In fact, most Jehovah's Witnesses don't even know that they were NGOs of the scarlet-colored beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. That is damning. If the members of the religion knew that they were an NGO of the UN, they would be way more likely to leave, realizing that they had just lied to them their entire lives. Here's another one. God has never demanded human sacrifice as part of worship. Never. He demanded animal sacrifice, and the only time he ever demanded human sacrifice was with Abraham and Isaac, which he then canceled and gave an animal in its place. And then a guy named Jephthah, who said, I will give you the first thing that runs out of my house to greet me when I come back from the war, if you allow me to win this war. He won the war. His daughter came running out to greet him afterward, so he sacrificed her to God. Those are the only 2 examples of human sacrifice, aside from Jesus, the obvious, I suppose. But was he really human? Not entirely, right? God's never demanded human sacrifice for his worship regularly. Why does a governing body demand human sacrifice through rejection of a blood transfusion? If you get in a car accident, you're losing blood fast, they need to give you a transfusion. If you tell the doctors, yes, save my life, you will be shunned from your friends and family until the day you die. They will tell you you will not get into the kingdom of God for simply saving your own life. God never demanded human sacrifice. Why do Jehovah's Witnesses demand it? Here's another one. Jehovah's Witnesses use Bible math to claim that Jesus came to earth invisibly in 1914. How can you accept the math knowing that it was calculated out to be 1843 by the Millerite movement, and when nothing happened then, they claim Jesus came back invisibly too? How can you justify this absurd Bible math that has failed over and over and over again? But a number of different groups did this. And when 1914 failed, Charles Taze Russell went on to do other predictions. His successor, Joseph Rutherford, did more predictions. 1922, 1925. Jehovah's Witnesses as an organization did more than that. 1975, the year 2000. They just kept making prediction after prediction off of the same flawed Bible math that fell flat every single time through the 1800s. Here's another. Why do Jehovah's Witnesses consider their old literature apostate material and threaten shunning for people who possess it? How can they justify that? For example, let me show you some of this apostate literature. This is a 1947 watchtower produced by Jehovah's Witnesses, now considered apostate material. They wrote it. 1947. Are you also excommunicated? They talk about the pagan roots of excommunication, of disfellowshipping. How do they justify that? That whole thing. Apostate material and shunning and all of it. There is no good justification for any of this. It's just hypocrisy all the way down. Here's another one. Why aren't beards allowed? Several Bible characters had beards, and even Charles Taze Russell had a beard. Isn't it strange that the founder of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society had a beard, but it's unacceptable for Jehovah's Witnesses to have one today? You want to know the real reason they don't allow beards? Joseph Rutherford, the first official president, I guess, of the organization. All right. Charles Taze Russell was the founder of the religion. Dies Halloween night, 1916. Joseph Rutherford does a hostile takeover shortly after that. I think in the late 19-teens, early 1920s. Does a hostile takeover, claims all of the properties and the everythings. He was a judge, and he claimed it all and renamed it from Bible students to Jehovah's Witnesses in 1930, in the early 30s, I think 33 maybe. And after that hostile takeover, a lot of people were kind of iffy about it. There was a big splinter. A lot of people left. A lot of people stayed, took sides. And in an effort to fortify his position as sole leader of the organization and to try to erase the past, he banned beards because his predecessor, Charles Taze Russell, the founder, had a big bushy beard. This guy right here, Charles Taze Russell, had a big beard. Joseph Rutherford did not like that. He didn't want any reminders, so he banned him. That's the real reason. Ask Jehovah's Witnesses why beards are banned. Most don't know. They'll say that they are just expected to be clean-shaven because they're supposed to stand out from the rest of the world. It's nonsense. It was because of Joseph Rutherford being a scumbag. Anyways, there you go. There are a few questions you can ask Jehovah's Witnesses if you're trying to push buttons and push the limits and get their attention. Thank you for the email, Sheena. I appreciate that.
So, Owen, it's Lou. Got just a quick opinion. This is just me. If God does a bunch of assholes in the Bible, which he does, and Christians today act like arrogant assholes, which they do, does that mean that Jesus was likely also an asshole? Or was he a complete liberal, loving everyone, peace guy that God and his Christians hated? Questions.
Yeah, I appreciate the voicemail there, Lou. That was an interesting one. Interestingly enough, there was an old, I don't know, he wasn't a prophet, but he was very influential within Christianity in the early days. And there was this guy that basically proposed the idea that the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament were completely different gods. I think Marcion was his name. Is that who did it? I don't remember if it was Marcion or not. But anyway, completely different gods was the proposition. Yahweh wasn't even the God of the Christians in his mind. And I think that's a pretty apt conclusion to draw when you think about it. Jesus was supposed to be God for some Christians. Jesus was the reflection of God for others. He was perfect in every way. He was sent by God. He, at the very least, reflects God's personality, right? But the personality reflected in the Old Testament does not match up at all with what Jesus is. So my suspicion, honestly, is that Jesus came along and completely warped and distorted people's understanding of the scriptures. Up to that point, people understood God to be vengeful and angry and violent. And Jesus was a loving hippie that just didn't want anybody to hate anybody for anything. So I think that it was the last suggestion you gave, yeah. I think Jesus was just a nice person, honestly. But you know what? We'll never know. We'll never know. Was Jesus even real? I think he probably was, but that's about all we can tell about the guy. And thanks for the voicemail, Lou. I appreciate that.
Hey, when Guy Young, Brookville, Illinois, just got a clip on Bo over the fifth column stating how far is Russia going to go? Why don't they give up?
Yeah, Bo of the fifth column is pretty interesting. I watch him from time to time.
Russia will not give up. If Putin wants his legacy, okay, they might settle if Biden wins the election. Okay, the Democrats win, they will go to the table. And if the GOP wins and Trump wins, Trump is going to just give them whatever they want. So Putin is just waiting after the election, which is going to be just about 2 years out from when they first started the invasion. February of 22, it's going to be February 24. It will be over one way or the other. And I feel strongly that Russia will lose this war, and so will the GOP. RIP 2023.
Yeah, okay, that's an interesting suggestion. Let me lay this down for you. Put yourself in Putin's shoes for a second, okay? Here's the thing. When you redraw lines on a map, that's permanent, pretty much. That's what Israel's been trying to do with Palestine. Just slowly, gradually redrawing Palestine's lines, removing people from their homes and moving settlers in, setting up illegal settlements in Palestine, pushing in on the edges a little bit, and now that area is yours. That's why everybody wants to go back to the 1967 borders. Everyone except Israel, of course. Because the 1967 borders were the last legally recognized borders. So when you erase those lines and redraw them the way you want them, it stays that way. And Putin knows that. Now, what price is Putin paying? He's not paying a price, really. You know who's paying a price? Russian citizens, the military. People are out there dying in the streets because Putin is sending them out to war. He built up a big war chest, had a whole bunch of money to fund this thing, and then he pulled the trigger and sent them in. He doesn't care how many people die. When you're a sociopath, put yourself in his shoes. Imagine you don't care. Imagine that you view human life like they're little toy soldiers or whatever. Why do you care if one gets melted down? Why do you care if one gets its leg twisted off or whatever? When you have, 900,000 of these soldiers going out, all you really care about as Putin is redrawing that line. Because once he takes Luhansk and Donetsk regions, it's permanent. They're going to have to fight for those regions again. And Ukraine doesn't have the manpower to fight an offensive war that way. So all Putin wants to do is redraw the lines a little bit right now. If he can just take a little bit of it, he'll be happy. His goal, seems to me, originally was to take all of it, kill Zelensky, and take Kyiv and name it like a vassal state, basically. But that did not work out for him. So next best thing, take as much land as you possibly can. He's going to die soon anyways. I heard he has cancer. He might have cancer. I don't know if it's serious or what, but he's like 70-something. I mean, how long does he realistically have? He just wants Ukraine to belong to Russia, ultimately. It's psychotic. Willing to kill anybody it takes.
Hey, Owen, Guy Young, Brookfield, Illinois. Just caught a clip on the Friendly Atheist. I guess Wisconsin passed a law that bans mandatory church closures during pandemics or whatever. I got no problem with that. I mean, let those idiots die. That's the way I feel about the Middle East a lot, too. It's a bunch of religious fanatics killing each other, or a bunch of religious fanatics basically putting their lives on the line. I'm fine with that. Just leave me out of it.
I can understand that perspective, although I don't really agree with it entirely. So as far as the pandemic thing goes, well, first of all, I don't want anybody to die because human life is like the rarest and most valuable thing in the universe, in my opinion. Every life is valuable, and I feel like if we could just pull people out of this stupor that they've fallen into. I was one of those religious fanatics at one point. I very easily could have just been born into a situation where I was in this extremist religion that, was violent and wanted to send me to war and everything. Very possible. Any one of us could have been born into that. But if you talk to somebody and talk them out of it, maybe you can save their life, That's not going to happen for everybody, but that's my goal. Aside from the fact that I view human life as the most valuable thing on the face of the planet, every life, even religious people's lives. Religious people aren't just hurting themselves. They're hurting everybody around them too. Like Greg Locke and specifically John MacArthur, Pastor John MacArthur, have had COVID sweep through their churches or whatever, their mega churches, and then they, completely ignoring the fact that it's real, go to the supermarket and touch everything and breathe on everything and sneeze, and because they don't care. They don't think it's real, or they don't think it's a big deal, and they're going to prove that to own the libs, So it's not just themselves they're hurting. And also, in the Middle East, again, it's not just themselves that they're hurting. It's innocent civilians on both the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side. And that's what makes it so truly tragic and grotesque. Netanyahu is an absolute monster. The most horrific monster, one of the most horrific monsters there is out there. And so is Hamas. They're absolutely terrible. Do I care what happens to those two specific, Hamas and Netanyahu? I don't want anybody to die. I wish they could be talked out of it. Since they can't be talked out of it, what am I going to do to stop them? Let them go nuts on each other. But they're hurting everybody around them too. That's the problem. Anyway, yeah, it's just sad. The whole thing is sad, honestly. I do care for human life. That's my hang up, Let me know what you think about it in the comments.